Gender-based violence refers to violence that targets individuals or groups on the basis of their gender. It is a serious violation of human rights and a life-threatening health and protection issue. Gender-based violence can include sexual, physical, mental, and economic harm inflicted in public or in private. It also includes threats of violence, coercion, and manipulation. This can take many forms such as intimate partner violence, sexual violence, child marriage, female genital mutilation, and so-called honor crimes.
People are still having a problem of even understanding the concept of GBV, for instance. When you talk about GBV, you are not only restricting violence sexually. There are other levels of violence. Well, ironically enough, we do inflict same violence in our own ways, in our various places of work, our interaction, without realizing that we're committing same. So not until people begin to understand the wider concept of GBV, which will give you a true picture of violence.
Sadly, many widowhood practices in Nigeria are rooted in violence. Folashade Johnson was only 26 years old when she and her husband were involved in a car accident. Unfortunately, he did not make it out alive. Left alone to fend for their only child, her husband's relatives focused on laying their hands on their material possessions.
Which means Shade will not take anything out of that house. That's everything, that they won't even let me take not a slippers out of the house. And one of them that stood, because she had a widow experience too, because she lost her husband at a tender age as well. I guess maybe because of that experience, made her to know, and she could put herself in my shoes. And she stood, she was just like, what do you mean by saying that Shade Onimunkokon? Fine, if you don't want her to take anything, what do you want to do with her on this? What do you want to do with her panties? What do you want to do with her shoes, her bags? Do you want to use it for jars or for anything? At least she should be able to move her personal belongings out of the house. And I was marched out of the hospital to that house. When I got there, they took me straight to my room to move just my shoes, my clothes, my bag. I'm talking about mine. I did not even move all my things out of that house, because I remember that going to that house, I went with pots, I went with stoves and all of that. They didn't let me take it out of the house. I went with rug. They didn't let me take mine. Those ones are my personal. They didn't let me take it out of the house.
Her in-laws neither provided support nor care.
Once I had their child, the girl was 10 months old then. They don't care. And up to now, they don't.
After the funeral, Folashade was left to fend for herself and child.
When my 10-month-old baby will not eat until 2 p.m. I'm sorry, sometimes I still get emotional, so when I talk about it sometimes, I'm fine though, but sometimes I could not help the tears. When all I'll have will be 5 naira. And I'll buy that, the little girl, 5 naira biscuit to survive. She sucks. All she'll do is that to put in her thumb to suck, to sustain her, because I could not provide her food. She'll suck her thumb, sometimes till like 2 p.m. rather. And thank God the light was okay then. The first thing I did was I got one box TV, maybe for 3,000 or 2,000 plus. And then I got Bunny CDs. I'll just play it for her. So Bunny was my daughter's food with her thumb. I've been there. So this is actually what makes me to start this for the widows, that if I didn't go through that, I won't believe it that widows go through that. So Hope Stars Foundation for Widows was born out of my own widowhood experience. The fact that I walked through that part does not mean that every other person should.
One of the most talked about forms of gender-based violence is sexual. At only 12 years old, Antonia Ojenagbon was sent to live with her uncle who defiled her for many years. This is her story.
So one night I was sleeping and I felt a hand touch my breast. So because, like I said, I'm from a very strict Christian background, sex was never ever mentioned in our house. So I didn't know anything about sex. But that night, a hand touched my breast when I was sleeping. Everywhere was dark, so I didn't know who did it. The hand moved from my breast and it moved to my vagina. I was so scared. I actually thought it was a monster because that was when the abuse started. So every night, this monster, like I used to call it before I was able to put a face to it, will come, raise my dress up, have sex with me, and I would never know who was doing this because everywhere was dark, like I said, and in the morning, I don't know who is doing this to me. But there was one particular day. In the morning, my uncle just said to me that if you ever tell anybody what is going on in this house, I'll kill you. So it was that day I was able to put a face to this monster that comes in the night. I think that's one of the most devastating days of my life because that day something died inside of me because this is somebody I call daddy. This is somebody I trusted so much. I've loved him since when I was a child. He was my favorite uncle.
On seeking justice.
If you want to prosecute in this Nigeria, it's very frustrating. I have to be very honest with you. Then I checked my health. My health is very fragile. I had hysterectomy in 2017, late 2017. So I'm not as strong as I used to be before. So I checked all of that. And my husband said, do you have the energy to do this? When I checked my health, I said, I won't be able to do this.
On the effects of the sexual violence.
Even in church, somebody in the same department with me told my daughter, when I shared my story in church, that they couldn't be friends in church. So if my children did not know my story, my daughter would have found out from the child of a church member who told her, my mother said, we cannot be friends because your mother's uncle used to rape her when she was a child. And my daughter was in primary school then. She was in primary 5 when that happened. And she came home and she said, Mommy, so said. I was broken, I won't lie to you. Because that was the first time I was going to share my story in church. So I sat the children down and I said, we need to have a meeting. Do you guys want me to stop talking? My family is my immediate family is my biggest support. My husband and my children. So I said, if you guys tell me today, I'm going to stop talking. I'm not going to talk again. You know, my son got up. I won't forget. He put his hand on my shoulder and he said, Mommy, if you didn't teach us about child sexual abuse, I never knew anything about that before.
Ebun Lomo, whose name has been changed to protect her identity, speaks about the domestic abuse she suffered in the hands of her now deceased husband.
Mo suffer gan torí bí mo ṣe marry báyìí. Mo ṣe bímọ ẹ̀kọ́ báyìí ni wàhálà bẹ̀rẹ̀. Kí ọmọ mi tó pé èyá ló ti nà mí tójú mi ò ti rí báyìí.
For several years, she remained in the marriage, enduring the abuse. After 3 children, he walked out on them. His exit from the marriage did not stop the abuse. He would often return to her house, and any altercation led to another round of beatings.
Lóru báyìí tó wá nà mí tó tún kọjá sí ibi tó ń gbé. Mo ṣáà ṣe kọjá sí ọlọ́pàá oríta ni mo lọ. Oríta mo ti lọ mọ́ ọlọ́pàá. Wọ́n dẹ̀ tẹ̀lé mi lọ ilé ẹ̀ nígbà yẹn. Bàtí màá ṣe mọ́ ọlọ́pàá torí mo ṣáà béèrè ilé ibi tó ìyàwó ẹ̀ gbé. Wàá mọ́ ọlọ́pàá lọ sí ilé ẹ̀. Bàtà ti débẹ̀ ó ti sá lọ. Àwọn ọlọ́pàá wá ní kó wá rí àwọn.
According to the World Health Organization, 1 in 3 women globally are subjected to physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner or sexual violence from a non-partner.
We're talking about it every day as we are sitting here now. A girl has just been raped in the community. A woman has just been killed. Another boy has also been raped. Like I said, it's not just about the women, nor the girl child, but even the boys are affected. But like we said, the magnitude, the girls are more victims.
According to the 2018 Nigeria Demographic and Health Survey, 30% of girls and women between the ages of 15 and 49 reported being subjected to sexual abuse.
At our level now, through the data we are receiving for just one facility, which is called Sexual Assault Referral Center, at an average, we receive 80 incidents of GBV per month. Just one facility. Think about if we harness other service providers that are now reporting GBV incidents, the story will not be a very pleasant one.
Dubbed as the pandemic within a pandemic, gender-based violence has been on the rise. Nigerian National Commission for UNESCO reported that violence against women increased sporadically to 297% from the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Findings of a United Nations Women report showed that 48% of Nigerian women have experienced at least one form of violence since the COVID-19 pandemic. Verbal abuse and denial of basic resources were the most common forms of violence against women reported. From patriarchy to religion to societal norms, gender-based violence is entrenched in the way we live.
Aware that we're living in an environment where a patriarchy does exist, and these systems haven't been encouraged by our harmful social cultural norms that subjugate women in many communities and in many homes. And so there's a lack of inclusion of women in making those decisions with regards to either allocation of resources, with regards to making decisions politically, and even with regards to making decisions in her community or even in her home.
Religious factors. Many people would do something, an act of violence, because their religious leaders would not frown at it or might not take any action. And so we have churches, mosques, we have traditional religious people who continue to do these things because the religious leaders will not say anything about it, or silently enforce those activities or those actions, by saying you need to teach a woman, her place.
If, for instance, a child reports a matter against, let's say, the parents for something that they feel a violation of their rights, possibly for, things that would actually push them into the negative, for instance, they would actually be reported. And then the society would be like, what? You're reporting? What kind of a child is this that is reporting the parent? Nobody looks at, is what this child doing actually in the right? Is what this child doing in accordance with the law?
We are very much aware that 99% of domestic cases always have an accompanying financial abuse associated with it. Women don't make poor choices. Women cannot make the choice because she's not financially empowered.
Boys who are bought to read, to undergo this Quranic system of education. You understand them? But in the course of that, a lot of children are being abused, either by the malams themselves, or they are made vulnerable for abuse.
In the North, we shy away from talking about issues. We're not as open as in the South or in the East. We're more into ourselves. And it takes strength to actually talk about this particular issue, especially considering the stigma that is actually sometimes attached to it.
What laws are in place to tackle gender-based violence?
At the time the Honorable Minister came on board in August 2019, we had only 13 states that had domesticated the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act 2015. let me state here that the VAP Act is domiciled in NAPTI, but with advocacy championed by the Honorable Minister of Women Affairs, today we have 34 states that have domesticated the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act 2015, so 34 states. But domestication is not enough. Implementation is key. Implementation is also enough if you do not gazette, because the system, the legal system we have, requires that the law must be gazetted before it can be a law in the country. And luckily also, as the VAP Act is being domesticated in the states, also we've seen an increase in the number of states that have domesticated the Child Rights Act. So today we are reporting 31 states as against 23 in 2019. So that's a remarkable improvement.
What laws are in place to tackle gender-based violence in Kano?
Some of the laws here in Kano State. For instance, the VAP law, the VAP Act hasn't been domesticated yet. So also the Child Rights Act hasn't been domesticated yet in Kano State. So if you're talking about these two laws, they are still in process, but haven't yet been domesticated in the states.
The laws to practice Islam, and we're governed by, as a country, under Islamic law, we're governed by, especially for the northern state, by the Maliki school of thought. So the women kind of are protected, and the children are protected under Islam.
Sadly, this is not always the case.
If you talk about the issue of rape, oh, it is the way you dressed. Oh, it is your fault. And then the blaming of the survivor continues rather than dealing with the issues at hand. And in most scenarios, these particular issues are being reported to, we have the Hizbah, which is kind of like an Islamic police that tends to address or solve issues like this. But even at that particular stage, in most circumstances, what they do is tell the perpetrator to marry the victim. After all, you have spoiled her, you have defiled her, so you should get married to her.
What laws are in place to tackle gender-based violence in Oyo?
Take, for example, Oyo State. We have the Violence Against Person Prohibition Law of Oyo State 2020, which was sponsored by Honorable Wumi. And this law has been operative since then. It protects the rights of every person. Under the provision of the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Law, we have protection order. Recently, we engaged the court for protection order for a widow who they were doing a sort of widowhood practice for. Her husband died and they refused her burying her husband. And the family were like, okay, give us death certificate, give us some documents. If you don't do that, you won't be allowed to bury your husband. So we seek redress in court, and the court granted us protection order for the woman and the children. So eventually she was able to bury her husband.
We've had trainings for law enforcement agencies on VAP law. Then the judges in Oyo State, judges, magistrates, grade A customary court presidents have been trained. Those trainings came up last year, December, with the support from UNFPA through CPRH at UCH.
Yet, many times survivors don't get a fair hearing when they report the abuse.
So sometimes we have cases, we go to police station and a police officer is saying, Madam, kind of stuff, like don't insult your husband and stuff. And then I'm wondering, how does he solve this thing? So some of those comments sometimes water the case down. Some of these comments are the reason why some of these women don't want to go further with the cases and stuff. Okay, for example, in the case of marital rape, so this woman is thinking, am I being raped? For real? She's thinking it, and then she goes to the police station, and the police station is like, your husband raped you. Madam, your husband raped you. And then she's already in doubt before going to the police station. And then the officer attending to her is also validating the doubt. And then sometimes they just go home and think, perhaps it's in my head. But if the police force put the right person in all those desks and they are reiterating it that I believe you, and then please explain for that to also establish whether this woman is raped for real or she's not, is different from just laughing and saying, your husband, how can your husband rape you kind of situation.
What needs to be done to ensure justice is served swiftly?
There needs to be more judges, at least. And then if you have more judges to deal with other cases, and then you could have special courts manned by these particular judges that would handle issues of this nature to ensure that there's a speedy dispensation of justice in respect of that.
Some states are already moving with the establishment of the specialized courts, and we're seeing that if something is happening now, it does not take long for conviction to take place.
What is being done to prevent gender-based violence?
Think about a month or so, I am fortunate to participate in the launching of what they call Sexual Offenders Database, okay, which is housed in the Ministry of Justice. In my department, in the ministry, we have a unit on Child Protection Information Management System. We capture incidents of GBV, while that of Ministry of Justice capture those that were prosecuted. You understand? So we work hand in hand together. Through the data they provide, that will give a better idea of people should not, it's like deterring people from perpetrating that act. You have their pictures, you have their details. Anywhere you go, you're not secured in Nigeria.
What support is available for survivors of gender-based violence?
The referral center, that's the Sexual Assault Referral Center, also known as Abiyamo Center in Oyo State. That one was put in place last year. And since that time, it was also established with the support from UNFPA through AF, Center for Reproduction and Population, Reproductive Health and Reproductive and Family Health, AF. Yes. So since the inception of that Sexual Assault Referral Center, people have been coming because all the treatments there are free.
Empowerment package and livelihood skills specifically for GBV survivors. Okay, so this is how we operate at the level of ministry. One provides data, the other provides psychosocial support, while the other provides empowerment package. But of course, you had other like legal services. It's part of service provision.
Why do many perpetrators of gender-based violence escape the long arm of the law?
Then I must mention the fact that we have community groups, that also frustrate, getting justice. And sometimes these groups conflict, with government agencies. So for instance, landlords associations. A landlord association can decide that, oh yes, in our own community, if somebody gets sexually abused, we'll just, we'll punish the person, we'll punish the perpetrator ourselves, either we'll beat him up or something, and then that's the end of it, So we constantly have issues like that. Or they scare the survivor so much, or scare the family, of the survivor so much that they say, oh, we're no longer interested in this matter, we don't want to be involved, anymore.
As a prosecutor, we make a lot of efforts to ensure that these cases are prosecuted, but unfortunately, due to availability or non-availability of witnesses, we are unable to prosecute some of the cases. So our conviction rate is actually low.
Beyond the laws and interventions, many survivors of gender-based violence are left to deal with the aftermath of the crime committed against them.
In mental health, we call post-traumatic stress syndrome, which is what you feel after a trauma has occurred, maybe after 3, 4, 5 months, 6 months later, when you look back, start having a flashback of what happened. It's also as a result of violence, be it gender or otherwise. Then, when somebody is in an abusive relationship, gender or otherwise, there's always the possibility of loneliness, even in the midst of someone. And when people are lonely, when people are lost some certain aspect of relationship, they may now resort to some performance-enhancing substances, promising them, look, I'm going to help you elevate your mood. So now they can go to substances of abuse. They can use marijuana, they can use any other substance, cannabis, cocaine, or any of them. So in the process, what the substances now do is give them temporary relief from that situation. But when the effect of substances went off, they're still there.
Judging by the current efforts being made by the government, the war against gender-based violence, sadly, will be long and drawn out. In 2022 alone, over 7,000 cases of gender-based violence have been reported.
It is a war because when you're having 7,000 cases reported and you're having only 33 convictions and open cases are there, some of the cases are just like the closed cases. It's because the system becomes too rigorous and parents are saying, we are no longer interested.
It can no longer be business as usual in the war against gender-based violence. And until the Nigerian government strengthens its institutions, ensures justice is delivered swiftly for survivors, and doubles down in its commitment to protecting the lives and property of its citizens, nobody is truly safe.